Hello, good evening. So today I'm gonna go attend one of the most famous walking tour in East London area, Jack the Ripper tour. So I think uh, you will like my total walking tour. সবাইকে শুভ সন্ধ্যা যাচ্ছি হচ্ছে আজকে জ্যাক দ্য রিপার ওয়াকিং ট্যুর, যেটা ইস্ট লন্ডনের একটা ফেমাস ওয়াকিং ট্যুর। I'm here now. I think London walking to Jack the Ripper walk. So here's the meeting point. Yeah. So and this is a Tower Hill station. Basically, this walking tour starts from here. This is the meeting point. So this is one of the famous walking tour in East London area, I think. So I'm gonna experience today's walking tours with other tourists. So চলে এসেছি টাওয়ার হিল স্টেশন, যেখান থেকে এই ওয়াকিং ট্যুরটা শুরু হয়। সেটা হচ্ছে এই যে এখানে আর কি দেওয়া আছে বোট। এটা হচ্ছে মিটিং পয়েন্ট, দেখতে পাচ্ছেন টাওয়ার অফ লন্ডন বিল্ডিং। এই যে যেটা হচ্ছে এভরি নাইট 7:30 PM টাওয়ার হিল টিভি স্টেশন, ঠিক আছে। সো এখান থেকে শুরু হবে। So I just give a brief history about the Jack the Ripper, a famous notorious serial killer. And if I take you back in time, and this serial killer attempt several murder, especially women, and it was 1888 between April to February, and he did several murder in East London area like Whitechapel, Aldgate, that area. So and that was mysteriously it was mysteriously killed by the murderer. And even England police, even Scotland Yard, they all do all the research, all the investigation, but still this murder is remain mysterious because no one can bring him in trial. So that's why this is one of the most notorious story in East London about the serial killer. আজকে Sunday, 13th of April, I think. সো আজকে যে ট্যুরটা করবো সেটা হচ্ছে জ্যাক দ্য রিপার ওয়াকিং ট্যুর। অ্যান্ড এটা আসলেই খুব ফেমাস ওয়াকিং ট্যুর। যদি জ্যাক দ্য রিপার সঙ্গে বলতে হয় তো সেটা বলতে হবে যে 1888, যেটা বিটুইন মে অ্যান্ড টু ফেব্রুয়ারি, সরি। সো এই সময়ে এই যে জ্যাক দ্য রিপার হচ্ছে মিস্টেরিয়াস সিরিয়াল কিলার, অন দ্য মোস্ট নোটোরিয়াস সিরিয়াল কিলার ইন ইস্ট লন্ডন। সে অনেকগুলো মার্ডার করছে আর কি, এবং এই মার্ডারগুলো কখনই কোনো তথ্য কেউ ধরতে পারেনি, এবং এই যে মার্ডারার তাকেও কেউ গ্রেপ্তার করতে পারেনি, ঠিক আছে। তো এই বিষয়টা নিয়ে এখনও মিস্টেরিয়াস রয়ে গেছে আর কি। কারণ এই ক্ষেত্রে ধরেন এদের পুলিশ বলেন, সিআইডি বলেন, খুবই এক্সপার্ট সেই অনেক দিন থেকেই। তো ওই সময়ের এই মার্ডারগুলো যে করছে আর কি, সে এখনও মিস্ট্রিয়াস রয়ে গেছে। কারণ কেউ এই মার্ডারগুলোর ট্রু যে একটা এভিডেন্স বা মার্ডারকে ট্রায়ালে আনা সেটা করতে পারে। তো আজকে এই ট্যুরটা করব, এবং যেটা ঘোষলি মার্ডার বলতে পারেন, মিস্টেরিয়াস মার্ডার বলতে পারেন, যেটা এখনও মিস্টেরিয়াস সবার কাছে আছে। তো এখানে গাইডেড ট্যুর আছে, এখানে আরও অনেক আদার টুরিস্ট আছে যাদের সাথে আমি হাঁটবো আর কি, এবং বিভিন্ন স্পটে যাব। এসব স্পটে মার্ডারগুলো করেছে আর কি এই জ্যাক। তো সাথেই থাকুন। আর আজকের একটু শুরু হবে হচ্ছে যে টাওয়ার হিল থেকে। তো আমরা অন্যান্য প্লেস যেমন ধরেন ইস্ট লন্ডনে হোয়াইট চ্যাপেল, তারপর আদার প্লেস পর্যন্ত যাবো আর কি এই আদার টুরিস্টের সাথে। সো হোপফুলি আজকে এই ভিডিওটা আপনাদের ভালো লাগবে, সাথে থাকুন। তো দেখতেই পাচ্ছেন যে এখানে আদার টুরিস্টটা সাইন ইন করে দিচ্ছে, আমিও সাইন ইন করলাম আর কি আমার নাম। তো এক্স্যাক্টলি 7 o'clock আমাদের ওয়াকিং ট্যুর স্টার্ট হবে, যেটা হয় টোটালি 2 hours, 7 to 9 I think, এবং all the spot we will visit with a guided tour.
At play. Bruce Robinson, the historian and ripperologist who taught me everything I know, brilliant man, read his book, I'll give it to you everyone. I'm definitely 99.9% sure he knows who the killer is. He says something that's very cryptic, but it makes a lot of sense. People always say to me, how do you define the case study of Jack the Ripper? It's simple. Jack the Ripper is about the institution protecting itself from an enemy within by protecting the enemy. Okay, that sounds very cryptic, but as the night goes on, hopefully it will become very clear indeed. And we'll talk about that fight. We'll be speaking tonight. Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. There's very few photographs of them because photography was very expensive, and in its infancy, it cost a lot of money to get photographs. I would argue, and a lot of historians would argue, that there were more victims of Jack the Ripper, but the police did not want to take responsibility for them, because as far as they were concerned, on the 1st of January 1889, they had caught their killer. We'll find out later it was a scapegoat. There were several scapegoats for Jack the Ripper, but we'll find out that a little bit later. I would argue there are as many as 12 victims of Jack the Ripper. Sometimes some people say there were even more, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. We're going to head around our corner to talk about our first victim, Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly Nichols, and what she was doing the night in question on the 31st of August 1888, when she was seen last alive at 12 a.m. But before we do that, there's one more thing I want to show you. Follow me this way.
So problem is that I can video straight away, so I just doing video a little bit. So we're gonna go our first spot where one lady is killed it by the Jack the Ripper. So
This is the City of London Wall. This is really important indeed. And why is this important? Because a lot of people don't know this, even natives don't know, is that London is broken up into different cities. You heard of it? So currently we're in the borough of Tower Hamlets, which is in Shoreditch, which comes from the Old English word ditch. It is a ditch on the shore. But then we're going to go into the financial district known as the Square Mile. Please don't film me. Known as the Square Mile. And because this is important, because a lot of people don't know this, is that the Square Mile is
so I can't video directly because the two men told me that I can't video, so that's why to do like this little video. So I'm really sorry for that. So we're moving another place, and very sad that I can't video all the story because of he told me that I should not video directly, so that's why I stopped doing video everything. So it was so mind-blowing, all the dark history in East London area in 1888 that time happened in this area. I'm really sorry that I can't video, but it was so mind-blowing, man. I can't explain you how mind-blowing to listen all the story, and it's blown my mind. I will join more Jack the Ripper tour, I think, in future. So we are heading another place, another spot where Jack the Ripper committed two murder. So this is the building. It was 1890, 1889 was like sex worker building. Starts. So yeah. So he came here.
Quite dark. Even the gates, even though the lamps were gas lamps, now they're electrically lit. That's what originally what they looked like. Spruced up. Yes. So my point is with the cheese grate is that it was originally rectangular, but because of the skyline laws, they weren't allowed to build it. They said you literally have to cut it in half. And the architect said, "Okay, we will," and that's what they did. They called their bluff, and it worked. Now let's talk about our third victim, Elizabeth Stride, also known as Elizabeth Gustaf's daughter. She was not English; she was Swedish. She had emigrated here quite young with her husband. He may have been violent because we understand that he kept separating from him all the time. She was murdered about a mile in that direction. The crime scene doesn't exist anymore. It got obliterated during the London Blitz, ironically. And they owned a coffee shop in Poplar. So they had an all right life. However, things started to turn sour and she was on her own, working the street, spending a lot of time at the docks, mending nets, but that was enough to survive. She was living in and out of the Doss house as a sex worker. Her nickname was Long Leg Lizzie, or Long Liz Stride, or Long Leg Liz Stride. Why? Because some people say it has long legs, but that doesn't make sense because she was 5'4". So what it was believed actually when Dr. Wynne Baxter suggested that maybe her nickname was Long Leg Lizzie because her right leg was half a foot longer than her left, which gave her a very distinctive limp, and hence the nickname Long Leg Lizzie, Long Liz Stride, because of the way she had to move her leg. And she was last seen on Berners Street. This is Berners Street. This is a mock-up of how it looked like. She was murdered down the alleyway, which is known as Duckfield's Yard, and she was seen several times. She was seen being roughed up by a ruffian, by another guy called Israel Schwartz, a Hungarian Jewish guy before her. And then she was last seen alive 15 minutes before she was murdered by a fruit seller called Matthew Packer, who gave her grapes, which is really interesting indeed, because these grapes were found on her when she was murdered. And Matthew Packer, in my opinion, is the most important eyewitness of the entire investigation, and his intelligence and his statements have been suppressed by Scotland Yard for decades. I want to talk about that a bit later on. This was where she was murdered, right here on the entrance of Duckfield's Yard. Why didn't anyone hear this murder? Because it was right next to the International Working Men's Club. They were singing and dancing and drinking, and they didn't hear anything. And roughly at around 1 a.m., a man called Louis Deemshirts was driving his coach and cart and his horse, his pony, down Berners Street. However, there was a lot of low-lying fog and mist, so visibility was very bad. However, he saw a figure come out, a silhouette of Duckfield's Yard, and he didn't think anything about it. He thought it was just one of the punters who were in the International Working Men's Club. However, when his pony approached the alleyway, it bolted and it refused to go down the alleyway, which meant there was something in the way. So he took out his lamp, and there he found Elizabeth Stride, again in the classic Jack the Ripper pose, flat on her side, and throat had been cut from left to right, right to left, so violently and aggressively it scratched and scarred the bone, almost decapitating her. But that was it. There was no mutilations, no butchery, nothing of the sort. No organs have been removed compared to the other two victims.
We are moving another place, another spot of the murder. So I think this is really, really mind-blowing. But sadly, I can't video entire history because he already told me that I should not video anyway. But it was so mind-blowing, and I have to join another walking tour maybe in the future. It's so mind-blowing to know the story, and it's just so crazy story. I mean, so we are now Aldgate area. This is the stars. He mentioned that it was 1888 prostitute church. I mean, there are lots of prostitutes around here, and this is a central place that time, and 1888. So that's so crazy. Lots of history need to learn, and the only way if you walk with this tour. So you can learn all the dark history in East London and about the Jack the Ripper. Very crazy and aesthetic, and it's amazing. Though lots of saints in this area, there are lots of high-rise building, but still vibe is there. It's so crazy.
Right here. This is what I like about doing Sunday. It's a little bit quieter. This is Mitre Square. Remember that name? It's very important. If you're into your criminology, Mitre Square, because serial killers like patterns and shapes of Mitre Street. And I know it's modernised, but this is exactly how it looked, the layout of the Victorian era. I'm going to show you a map so you know I'm not telling you things, okay? And right here, by this primary school, is where Catherine Eddowes was murdered, right in this exact spot. If any of you want to take a photograph or for a Tinder profile picture, no judgment, I know who you are. So let's talk about, okay, so all the heat is over there, 1 a.m. on Berners Street, where the murder took place. Catherine Eddowes, the other thing I should say is, I always forget this, very important. Mitre Square wasn't where you would solicit. I can explain it anyway. This was where it was a rendezvous point. It was a pre-arranged destination, normally where wealthy men would come to meet sex workers to take them somewhere else. Does that make sense? So this time of night, it would have been desolate. There would have been barely anyone here. Catherine Eddowes was last seen roughly at 12:15 a.m. on the other side of the building, just wandering around waiting for someone. She was waiting for someone. Was she waiting for Jack? Very interesting. All right, at 1:25 a.m., we don't really know. A policeman who was on his beat, do you know what I mean? You return to the same spot every half hour or so. He saw her alive at 1:25 a.m. He would go away and come back and find her murdered. How unlucky is that? He could have caught the killer in the act. And this is the big question. Did Jack become lucky in a window of opportunity, or did he know the logistics and the comings and goings? He's not convinced. Did he know the logistics? Yeah, this is the thing. But you've got to argue it in your essay. Was he lucky in the window of opportunity, or did he know the comings and goings of the police? Because they all had the same beats. And this is why it sort of compounds the evidence that he lived in the area, or he had lodgings in the area. Okay? And the last time officially she was seen alive was roughly 1:30 a.m. She was seen by 3 Jewish merchants coming out of the Imperial Club, and she was seen of a man. And the man was described as being 6'3" and above, powerfully built, well-spoken, well-dressed, bowler hat, moustache, possibly a beard. They couldn't tell because he'd pull his bowler hat down, creating a shadow, tan overcoat. But it wasn't just the way they were talking to each other. Their behaviour was very bizarre. They weren't just chatting to each other, they were laughing with each other and kissing each other romantically and singing to each other and dancing with each other. The 3 Jewish merchants at the Riff Inquiry said they were acting like a couple in love. Now this is very bizarre because sex workers and clients would not behave in this fashion, all right? Because Victorian London was a place of rumour, scandal and gossip. Your reputations could be destroyed if word got out that you were sleeping around with sex workers. Even though everyone did it, it wasn't the done thing. There was an etiquette. Also, it's very interesting because this is a big question that comes out of this interaction. Did Jack know his victims, or was he a bit of a charmer? Because I mentioned this earlier, these women probably have more intelligence than the police do, because they're the ones working on the street and they're looking after each other, all right? They're also very tough, they're very savvy, they're not stupid. They're not going to go down a dark alleyway with a stranger unless they know them or they find them very seductive. And this is why I say, was Jack the Ripper a bit of a charmer? And I don't say that flippantly. My auntie has worked with psychopaths her entire life, and do you know what she said to me? Very chilling. Psychopaths are some of the most charming people she's ever met in her life, because they are predators and they will get their prey by any means necessary. And a cross-reference I like to use when you're writing your essays, kids, is Ted Bundy. Sorry, it's been a very long week, I do apologise. Do you know Ted Bundy yet? Yeah. No one could believe that this charming, handsome lawyer had committed these awful, heinous crimes. Go on Netflix if you dare, it's really disturbing, and watch the Ted Bundy tapes. This guy was very manipulative, very clever, really evil.
very evil indeed. Because it would only be 15 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes would be found right here, again in the classic Jack the Ripper here pose. This is a mock-up of what it looked like, okay, very interesting. So I can't do that because it does that, so it doesn't help me. So where we came from is there, yeah? That is that over there. And the corner, the wall would have come out here on either side, and that's Mitre Street there. So do you see the layout is exactly the same as it was in 1888? Hang on, let me show you the crime scene one, because that's more cool. So you know I'm not fibbing, all right? And she was found murdered right here, again in the class. Sorry, okay, I forgot. Sorry, I'm getting overexcited. Just filing through. Several years ago, I didn't do this with any photos. I don't know what I did. I just talked to you for 2 hours. What the hell did I talk about, you know? Catherine Eddowes, she had fallen on pretty hard times. This was the worst part of her life when she was here. She'd been in the sex trade most of her life. She was single at the time. She didn't have any husband. She had been drunk and disorderly that morning, and she'd been imprisoned just to sober up. And then she was released. She was quite an attractive woman, but by the time in her life, she came from a pretty low background, born and bred Londoner. But yeah, the thing is, it's a common trait. If you didn't have a boyfriend or husband, you didn't have a primary income. If you didn't have a primary income, there weren't any jobs that you could have. Unless you were a scullery maid. That was the best job you could have if you were a working class woman, because it meant you lived in the lodgings of your master or mistresses. I mean, the work was really hard though. You were working like 18-hour days. They'd feed you very well though.
So this is the place Jack the Ripper murder a lady here and left the evidence other side. Also been, I think.
A few years' time. So this is Galston Street, which is one of the only original streets left there, the Galston Street Stand. This is called Merchant's House. This is an original Victorian building. If you remove the shutters and the signs, this is exactly how it looked like. This was a Jewish ghetto, slum. This is where the poorest of the poor lived. And this building here was an even larger building where it was a very bad slum, very low Jews that lived in the area, and it was at the railway road. The police station was just down the road here. And this building right here is where Jack the Ripper left evidence on purpose for the police to find in this fish and chip shop, ironically called Happy Days. And I find this quite creepy. Where we're standing right here, Jack walked in this very area, we're standing right here, because these shutters here wouldn't have existed. They would have been open, and it would have been an open doorway. What you see here and above, the brickwork, all of this here is original Victorian, which is quite creepy. That's why I say take photos. It might not be here for long. Come in, please, come in. I'm just going to take this off. It's really very heavy. So, I've been tour guiding all week. I'm knackered. I want some alcohol. So, now, this is where it gets very interesting. We know that the killer left this evidence because he did it on purpose. He wanted everyone to know. How did we know it was him? Because right there, I can't get to it, but right there in that corner behind this lovely thing, it was left a bit of Catherine Eddowes' dress. He'd ripped it off and it was covered in her blood and excrement. Why? Because he'd wiped her intestines on it. Why did he do that, Ben? I don't know. He's a psychopath. And then on chalk, on the left-hand side, in Jewish tailor's chalk, I think he was having a joke, do we? Do you recognise the writing? Yeah, very similar, isn't it? You keep forgetting the style of writing, it's very important. This is how you catch the killer, in my opinion. It's the only proper evidence that we can rely upon. He wrote in Jewish tailor's chalk, "The Jews are the men who will not be blamed for nothing." The Jews are the men who will not be blamed for nothing. It's a double negative. It means the Jews are the meant to be blamed. So the city police turned up because they got the tip off. They were very professional. They took a photograph of the crime. They sort of warranted off the area. There were only 3 of them, and they were very professional. Then this is where it gets weird. So Charles Warren, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, not City Police, Metropolitan Police, decided to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, get in his carriage in Green Park near Buckingham Palace in his massive townhouse, drive over 40 minutes to a place in London he had never been before in his entire life. And at the Ripper inquiry in 1890, he was asked by the judge, who was very impartial in the independent inquiry, why on earth were you there in the first place? And he said, I was just passing through. Okay, in a murder inquiry, we always give benefit of the doubt. But then how did he know to come here, out of all of the doors in Whitechapel? Now, Sir Charles Warren was a religious fanatic. He was put into as Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police because he was quite a scary man, very forthright. He had spent most of his life in the Royal Engineers. He was a colonel. And he gave up his commission in 1887, and then his best friend, Sir Thomas Matthews, gave him the very cushy job of being Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police without any background in police.
So we are heading to our final spot of the murder. This is the most brutal murder did by the Jack the Ripper. It's so crazy. I mean, if you don't come to join this walking tour and you don't know what was happening that time.
Which wasn't that many. And you'll see there by that window, do you see it says women? That was the female entrance. Round the corner by that gas lamp. That's an original Victorian gas lamp that's been refurbished now, it's electrically lit. That's where the men would enter because they had separate quarters. Why would they do this? Let's be grown up about it. What would happen if you mix together lots of sex workers with blind people? What's going to happen? So they separate. Ironically, that's an international students accommodation, so that's very little has changed. If you're looking for a good night, you know where to go. Yeah. This is one of the only remnants. And if you've got time later, and you really want to step back in the late 1800s, go down that street there, Artillery Avenue, it used to be called. It's like stepping back in the late 1800s. Really problematic. Let's talk about Mary Lincoln. Sexually, so she ran away from Limerick. She went to Wales, to Cardiff, and that's where she met her first husband, who was a Welsh miner, who very tragically died in a mining explosion, which is very common back in the Victorian era. Do you know the expression canary down the mine? That was true, like people died all the time. It was very hazardous. Very dangerous indeed. She wasn't really a prostitute. She was more like an escort, if you know what I mean. She didn't even necessarily sleep with her clients. She would her clientele were normally very elderly men that were very wealthy, quite lonely, and they just wanted sort of like her on their arm. They would dress her up like a doll and take her out to the Savoy or the Cafe Royal, you know, or Hyde Park, and sort of go up to their mates and be like, "You're right, lads, have you met the girlfriend Mary Jane?" And they were like, "Yeah, we saw her last week." Damn. But she was very popular indeed, very beautiful. This is the original crime scene photo of where she lived, which was Williams Court, which is right over there. And the only remnant of the steps, do you see these brass lines? They're the foundation lines of Williams Court. That's the only place we know. And this was Dorset Street. This was known as the most dangerous street in London. So dangerous that police could only go down there minimum groups of 12. Never did. Because it was so dangerous, indeed. Normally policemen go around in groups of 2, 12, they never did. Now, this is the first murder that happened in broad daylight on the 9th of November, 1888. I don't normally say this, but I'll tell you this because I think that there's a parallel. Why did this murder take place on the 9th of November? Do any of you know what happens on the 9th of November in London? Where are my natives?
The fireworks.
Yeah, 5th of November.
5th of November.
Sacrilege. Sacrilegious. 9th of November. Not 5th of November, 9th of November. Go on. No, that's the 11th. This is disgrace. 9th of November, the Lord Mayor's Parade. No? The Lord Mayor's Parade. Every policeman in the City of London will mark it.
So this facilitates the killer's need. And you know what else happened on the 9th of November? Sir Charles Warren's anniversary for his Masonic club. And there's a theory he did it on this day on purpose to upset him and to steal away the heat. Now, she woke up at 9:30. She bumped into her neighbour outside, and she said, I'm hungover, I've got indigestion, I ate a fish and potato pie the night before. That was corroborated by the coroner, so that definitely happened. She went to the 10 Bells, we'll see that later, the famous Jack the Ripper pub, which is still there. She had 3 pints of ale, came back, and she said, my client is still in there. As far as we know, Jack was still in there, okay? Because they had spent the night together. And the murder happened between 10 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. because at 1:30 p.m. the landlord came to collect rent. He went up to the door and he noticed that it was very hot and he couldn't enter the premises because it was so hot. So he knocked on the door and it singed his hand because it was so hot. And there was no answer. So he went around the side of the house here and he stepped in a large puddle of blanket out. It was too gruesome, of pieces of meat and meat juice. He didn't question it because there was squalor everywhere. More on that story later. And then he again knocked on the glass and there was no response. And it's a very old photo, but do you see there's a hole there? That was already there. He reached his hand in the hole and he took away the curtain, and what he saw was traumatising for the rest of his life. He went down to the Metropolitan Police Station and said, gentlemen, it's happened again. And within 25 minutes, the police arrived. It was H Division, Whitechapel, the Ripper Squad. And this is the illustration of him discovering the murder, because they couldn't show it because it was just too visceral. Too graphic. And then there were 8 policemen that turned up to this crime scene, including Detective Aberline, who was in charge of the Ripper Squad, who was the toughest and most experienced detective in London. This is who Johnny Depp played in From Hell, so it's not really accurate casting, but he was a very tough, very reliable police officer and one of the best around. However, they could not enter the premises without Sir Charles Warren being there and bloodhounds sent down from Scotland Yard to aid the investigation. 4 hours passed, there was no sighting of Sir Charles Warren and the bloodhounds. Why was that? Well, Sir Charles Warren had resigned the night before. Now, did he resign because he was under too much pressure, which he was, or did he resign because he knew it delayed the process of investigation? Aberline said, I've had enough. He was sick to death of the corruption in the Metropolitan Police. He broke open the door and all 8 policemen were sent in, and they slipped and injured themselves because the blood was so thick on the floor. There they found Mary Jane Kelly in the classic Jack the Ripper pose, completely naked, on her bed, flat on her back, knees pulled up. The throat had been cut from left to right, right to left, so violently and aggressively it scratched and scarred the bone, decapitating her. She'd been ripped with a large knife, sharp and surgical blade, top of the sternum, through her ribcage, through her belly, through her genitals, right way through her tailbone. Her uterus had been stolen, her liver had been removed, the intestines had been taken out and thrown over her left shoulder like a scarf. Her heart had been ripped out, stuffed in the kettle and boiled. That's why the house had been hot for so long, because the orifice had been boiling in the kettle for so long, the spout and the handle had actually started to melt. Her breasts were flayed off and placed behind her head like a pillow. The skin from her left eye had been skinned off from one go and placed on the bedside table. Chunks of her calf, her glute and her thigh had been ripped out and thrown out of the window, which the landlord had stepped in earlier and mistaken for pieces of meat and meat juice. Her eyeball had been cut out, her ears had been cut off, her nose had been cut off, and the skin from her face had been skinned off in one go and pinned to the wall like a bit of glass. There were bits of blood and skin everywhere. Detective Aberline and the Ripper Squad were vomiting outside the crime scene. Detective Aberline was so traumatised he was sitting on the doorstep, and his underling, Detective Edmund Reed, turned up to the crime scene late, and he found his superior on his knees with his face in his hands. And can you imagine the sort of things he had experienced? He was a very tough, very experienced detective. He said this immortal quote. He grabbed him and he said, "Edmund, don't go in there. I want to unseal the wounds." Here ended the Autumn of Terror. A lot of historians and criminologists say that this is very apt, that for the final murder, serial killers make them the most graphic and the most severe because they're trying to go out on the back. They're trying to tell the world that they've finished whatever they were set out to do. Everyone all right? I'm trying to say it's a quick original Victorian market. Originally it was a cattle market. However, in this very market, a man called George Lusk started his own gang, which you may have heard of, called the Whitechapel Vigilance. A gang that went around beating or killing anyone who they thought was Jack the Ripper. He was a local guy, quite tough, a local painter and decorator. A lot of innocent people were murdered, but they were sick of the incompetence of the police, known as blind man's buff, because they literally had no idea what they were doing.
So just finished Jack the Ripper 2. It was so mind-blowing, lots of history to learn, Amazing. Believe me, if you don't attend this walking tour, you you don't know how much thing you can learn from this walking tour. Just so mind blowing, and I get lots of information. I'm gonna finish my video here. Hopefully you will like my full video. I'm sorry because I can't video directly, as he mentioned that I should not video his face, so that's the main reason. So I'm gonna finish my video here. See you next video, and have a good weekend and good night.